Now in this section we will talk about iteration. But before diving into the iteration, I want to talk a little bit about Python list, which will be discussed in detail in data structure section. The reason that I want to talk about list in the beginning of this section is that we will use list to understand iteration very well. So it's highly recommended to be familiar with list before continuing to the iteration. As I mentioned here, I will just provide general concepts about list. And the list is what you would call a data structure. What does that mean? It's a way of organizing and storing data in Python. We will talk about different types of data structures in our upcoming lectures very detailed. But for now, we will learn only list, which is needed to understand iteration in detail. And here, I want to mention that data structures and algorithms are very essential for making very fast programs and for passing interviews. So if you want to get deep knowledge about data structures and algorithms in Python, try the complete data structures and algorithms course in Python, which includes more than 100 interview questions and all concepts regarding them. You can find the link of course in the resource section of this lecture. Now we have already seen ways of storing single piece of data in Python, and that was done through simple variable, where we just said, for example, a is equal to 3 or b is equal to 4. So by that we are storing these values inside these variables over here. But that's just storing one piece of data, such as a number or a string. But sometimes we want to store a group of pieces of data. The data that has some sort of connection with each other. For example, if you want to store all names of the countries in the UK, then it does not really make sense to store them individually because they are kind of belong together and they have relationship with each other. So it would be nice if you had a variable that is called countries in the UK, then you will be able to store all names of UK countries together in one variable. Now in other cases, you might also want to have order in your data. For example, if you are storing all people in the queue, then you want to able to keep hold of order in which they join the queue. You don't want to let the person to come and skip the queue and go to the first place to withdraw money from the ATM. Now in this case, when a new person comes, he or she has to stay at the end of the queue. So this is why we need to learn about list. So the list look pretty simple like this. It's just set of brackets and many items stored in it. And those items can be any data type. They can even have mixed data types, like you could store number, string, and boolean values together. It does not really matter. But what does matter is syntax. In Python, list always starts with open bracket like this and closing bracket like this. And then in between, you have your items separated by comma. And in order to store it in a variable, then it's same way as we have done before. The only difference is right side of this equal sign over here. So as you can see, in the left side we have a variable name, which is the list name in this case, and on the right side we are creating the list like this. So we have left and right brackets, and inside brackets we have items separated by comma. So for example, if you want to store a bunch of drinks, it might look like this. The name of list is drinks, and we have juice, coke, beer inside this list over here. So let's look at this using real code. Now let's say we want to store all names of the countries that are located in the UK. Now without knowing the list data structure, we might have written like this. So it's going to be like this: country 1 is equal to, for example, first country is England, then country 2 will be Scotland, and it continue like this. So we will have to create as many variables as we have countries. So for example, for all countries over here, we have to declare variables one by one. But now we know about list, so we can create a single variable and we can call it countries of UK. So instead of creating countries one by one, I'm just going to create a variable which is called countries of UK. So in this case, it's going to be like this: countries of UK. And then, as we mentioned, when we are creating a list, we have to put left bracket, open bracket, and closing bracket like this. Then inside these brackets, we can write our country names. So in this case, the first country will be England. And then to separate the items, we need to put comma, and the second country will be Scotland. And we can continue list by just adding commas over here after this country and adding piece of data after this comma, then adding another piece of data, then one more time put comma and adding another piece of code, and it will continue like this. And this way we end up with a list data structure. And now interesting things about UK countries is that different countries joined UK at different times. And actually you can head over to Wikipedia and you can see that each country joined the union in different times. So here I just want to mention that I'm not here to teach some politics or history about the UK, but the reason that I'm telling this is that the order of data matters when we are creating lists. Because if you wanted a list of UK countries that are in the order that they joined the kingdom, then the order which they are stored in our data structure is now immensely important. So this is another thing that you get with lists. You can use a list to store many pieces of related data, but they also have an order. And the order is determined by the order in the list. So the first piece of data over here will be in the first place, second item will be in the second place, and it will continue in the order that we declare our countries over here. Now here's the list of countries ordered by the date they joined the United Kingdom. Now you can see that if later on I decided that I want to know which country joined the first, then I can print this variable from this list over here, which is called countries of UK. So to print the first country from this list over here, all I have to do, I'm just going to write print statement. Then inside print statement, I'm just going to put the name of list, which is countries of UK. Then I can add set of square brackets. Then inside this bracket, I just need to type 0 as the index of piece of data I want to pull out of from the countries of UK. Now if I go ahead, run this code, you will see that it's printing out England to the console. Now if I keep increasing this number, for example, if I put 1 over here and run our code, you will see that in this case it's printing out Scotland. So now you might be wondering, that's kind of weird, when you type 0 you get England, right? So surely England should be the first item in the list. So this is kind of peculiarity with the computers and programming language. You'll tend to find the programmers start counting from 0. So England is at 0. Then Scotland is located at 1, and then Wales located at second index. And this idea might seem a little bit weird at first. Why this first item is located at 0 index? But if you think about that index number, that is 0, 1, 2, instead of being position, actually being an offset or a shift from the start of this list over here, then in this case, Juice is right at the beginning of the list. So it has offset or a shift of 0 from the beginning. But the Coke is shifted from the beginning by 1. So you can see that it's shifted from beginning by 1, and beer is shifted from beginning by 2. And then it makes more sense that the first item in the list is at the beginning of list, so it has no offset. So it has offset of 0. And you will find that in many programming languages, there are similar data structures to the list, and this is how they are usually ordered, starting from 0 and adding by 1. And now you can see that when you want to get hold of particular piece of data stored inside a list, you get the name of list, and then you add set of square brackets. And whenever you see the square brackets, you should be thinking that this might be related to list, because when you create list, you use square brackets. And when you try to get items out of the list, you also use the square bracket. And then inside of the square brackets is where you put the index or offset of the item that you want to get. Now, in this case, if I want to get the value of the Wales, in this case, England is located at the index of 0, which is 0 offset from the beginning. Then Scotland is located at the index of 1. Then Wales is located at the index of 2. So if I write over here 2 and run our code, you will see that it's going to print out Wales. And now, if I want to save this value that we are getting from the list into another variable, we can write it like this. So I can put it like this. For example, I can put the name of the variable Wales. So it's going to save the Wales inside the Wales variable, and we can print out Wales to the console like this. So if I run our code, you'll see that in this case it's printing out Wales to the console. And here, in addition to using the positive indexes over here, we can also use negative index. So instead of Wales over here, I'm going to put country, and then I'm going to print out country over here. So for example, if I put -1 over here, what do you think what will happen? So if I run our code, you'll see that in this case, it's printing out Northern Ireland. Because whenever you put the minus index over here, it starts from the end of the list and printing out the values to the console. Now in this case, if I put -2, you will see that in this case, it's printing out Wales to the console. Now here, the interesting moment over here is that at the beginning, we are starting from the 0, But when we start from at the end, we are starting from -1. Why we are not putting -0? The reason is -0 is not actually a real thing in math. So that's why we are starting from the -1. So this means that you can have positive indices and negative indices. So by using these indexes, we can pull out things out of the list by putting them inside square brackets after the name of the list. Now you can also change the items in the list using very similar code. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this part from here and pass it over here. For example, if I decided that Scotland is not spelled like this, it's spelled like this. So to access the Scotland, we know that we will need to put the index of 1 because it's start from 0 then 1. Then I can put the equal sign, which means that I'm going to assign a new variable to this cell over here. So it's going to be, so let's say we have decided that it's spelled like this, Scotland. So if I run our code, for example, and printing out the same index to the console, in this case, you will see that it's printing out Scotland. So instead of printing out specific value, if I just print out the list itself, you'll see that in this case, it's printing out as a Scotland, not with C, it's printing out with K over here. So by using the list name and inside square brackets, the specific data's index, in this case, we can update that index over here. Now, actually, in Python documentation, you can find more functions about list over here. So in our data structure section, we are going to talk about these functions in very details. Here, you just need to take into account that whenever you want to do anything on list, you can refer to documentation to use these functions over here. For example, if you use append function add item to the end of the list. So in this case, if I head over to our code, you'll see that if I decided that new country is joined to the countries of UK, all I have to do, I need to put the name of list, then dot. So then I can put, for example, append. So here, let's say a new country, which is test1, is joined to the United Kingdom. If I rerun our code, you'll see that in this case, test1 is joined at the end of the list over here. So by using append function, we can add new items to the list over here. And as I mentioned, the important moment over here is you don't have to memorize all the functions that are related to list or any other data structures, because this is the whole point of documentation. And also we have Google because there's a much information in the world to memorize. So it's a very inefficient way of learning to memorize everything that is related to programming or any other things. So the question is, how do you actually use it to do what you want to do? So what I recommend is when you come across a new thing, such as a list data structure, is just to have a look through the documentation and read it and see what's the possible things you can do. And once you have got the idea of this possibility, then next time when you need to use it inside your code, you just remember it and Google it and find the syntax and documentation and examples how can we implement it in your code. You just need to memorize that this is possible using lists. Instead of that, you should spend your time trying things out and try to get things to work instead. Now, as I mentioned before, we are learning lists over here to understand the iteration very well. So that's why with this, I'm ending this lecture over here. With this lecture, we have learned a general concepts about lists. From the next lecture, we are going to start to learn about the iteration and we are going to use lists in our iterations. So see you in the next lecture.